I didn't expect the truth to arrive between the clink of cutlery and the smell of roasted turkey. I didn't expect it to come wrapped in silence, disguised as smiles, delivered by the two people who taught me never to lie. And I definitely didn't expect that one meeting with a bank manager I almost didn't talk to would rip my entire family story apart. Because in that moment, sitting at the Christmas dinner table, while everyone laughed and toasted and pretended, my parents were lying. About me, about money, about everything. And the worst part? They did it in front of the whole family. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. Christmas was supposed to be safe. That's what I believed. No matter how messy life got, Christmas dinner was the one place where nothing bad was allowed to exist. We dressed better, we spoke softer, we pretended harder. This year was no different, or so I thought. The table was full, my uncles arguing over football, my cousins glued to their phones, my grandmother smiling in that tired way that says she's seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. The lights were warm, golden, forgiving, the kind of lighting that makes lies look beautiful. Then my aunt leaned forward, wine glass in hand, and asked the question that would change everything. "So," she said, smiling directly at me, "how's your new job going? Your parents said you're finally stable now." Finally stable. The room went quiet, not silent, but alert. The kind of quiet where everyone pretends not to listen while listening harder than ever. I looked at my parents. My mother didn't meet my eyes. My father nodded slowly, confidently, like he was confirming a fact. "Yes," he said, "everything's sorted now." Sorted. That word hit me harder than the question, because nothing was sorted, not my job, not my finances, not my life. And they knew it. They knew everything. I felt my face burn. My hands went cold under the table. I opened my mouth to speak, to correct it, to laugh it off, but my mother cut in before I could. "She's doing really well," she said quickly. "We're so proud." Proud. I remember thinking, this is not pride, this is performance. I forced a smile. What else could I do? Correct them in front of everyone? Expose the truth at Christmas dinner? Ruin the illusion they were so desperate to protect? So I nodded, and just like that, the lie became real. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had been turned into a story someone else wanted to tell, someone else's version of successful, someone else's comfort lie. Back then, though, I didn't know this was just the beginning. Dinner continued, plates were passed, jokes landed, but something had shifted. I could feel it in my chest, tight, heavy. Wrong. Every compliment felt like an accusation. Every smile felt rehearsed. My parents spoke about my plans with confidence that didn't belong to them. They talked about my future like it was already paid for. And then my uncle said it. "Well, with her savings and that account you helped her set up," he laughed, looking at my dad, "she'll be buying a house before all of us." My fork froze midair. Account? I turned slowly. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. I looked at my father again, waiting, begging for him to say something, to correct it, to admit it was a misunderstanding. Instead, he smiled. "He just guided her," he said. "She did the rest." That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a story they had been telling without me. After dinner, while everyone moved to the living room, I stood alone in the kitchen pretending to help. My mother joined me, drying dishes that were already dry. I asked her quietly, "What are you talking about? What account?" She didn't answer right away. She kept wiping the same plate over and over. "It's not the time," she whispered. "Later." Another word that felt like a door closing. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of anger, but because of fear, because something didn't add up. My parents had always been careful with money, protective, secretive, too secretive. So, a few days later, I did something small, something innocent, something that would destroy everything. I booked an appointment at the bank. I didn't go in looking for answers. I went in looking for reassurance. I wanted to hear that there was no account, no savings, no lie big enough to matter. The bank manager was polite, professional, calm. He typed my name into his system, paused, then looked up at me with a hesitation that didn't belong in a normal conversation. "Is there an awareness," he asked carefully, "that there's an account in your name that you're not the primary controller of?" I laughed, actually laughed, because it sounded ridiculous. "I think you've made a mistake," I said. He turned the screen slightly toward me, and that's when I saw it. My name, my signature, almost, and numbers that didn't make sense. That account has been active for years. Large transfers, withdrawals, all authorized by your parents. My ears rang. My mouth went dry. I couldn't feel my legs. "What was it used for?" I asked. He hesitated again. "For debt coverage and collateral." Collateral! I walked out of the bank into cold air that felt sharper than it should have. My entire childhood replayed in my head. Every sacrifice they claimed to make for me, every time they said family helps family, every moment I trusted them without question. Christmas dinner wasn't a lie, it was a confession, and I hadn't even scratched the surface yet, because the bank manager wasn't done talking, and neither were my parents. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes after leaving the bank. The engine was off. My hands were still on the steering wheel like I was bracing for impact that had already happened. People walked past me, laughing, carrying shopping bags, living normal lives, while mine had quietly split into before and after. Before, I trusted my parents. After, I didn't even know who I was on paper. I replayed the bank manager's words again and again, hoping they'd change meaning if I listened hard enough. Active for years, large transfers, authorized by your parents. Years. That meant Christmas dinners before this one, birthdays, graduations, moments I thought were celebrated honestly while something else was being built in my name without my consent. I went back inside the bank. The manager looked surprised but not confused, like he'd seen this before. "I need to understand everything," I said. My voice sounded calm, but it wasn't mine. It was borrowed strength. He nodded and pulled up more documents. The account had been opened shortly after I turned 18, barely legal, barely aware. A joint setup, disguised as future savings. My parents were listed as guardians first, controller second, and me just a name at the top. "Why didn't I know?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a paper across the desk. A form with my signature, or something very close to it. I stared at it until my eyes burned. "I never signed this," I said. He chose his words carefully. "It wouldn't be the first time we've seen family-assisted authorization." That phrase, family-assisted, made my stomach turn, like theft softened by blood. He explained how money had moved through the account, loans taken, debts covered, risks balanced, always just under thresholds that would trigger alerts, always quiet, always clean. They hadn't been reckless, they'd been smart. I left the bank with copies of everything, papers so heavy they felt like bricks in my bag. proof that my life had been leveraged while I was busy trying to survive on my own. That night, I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly until the sky turned dark, until the city lights blurred into something I couldn't focus on. Every memory now had a shadow, every "we're doing this for you" replayed with new meaning. I thought about Christmas dinner again, about how confident my father had sounded, about how my mother avoided my eyes. They weren't lying out of panic. They were lying because they believed they had the right. I finally went back home late. The house was quiet, too quiet. My parents were in the living room watching TV like nothing in the world had changed, like they weren't sitting on a secret that carried my name. I stood there for a moment watching them, the people who raised me, who tucked me in at night, who taught me how to write my name, the same name they had used to sign their debts away. "I went to the bank today," I said. The TV volume dropped instantly. My father didn't look surprised. My mother closed her eyes. That reaction hurt more than denial would have. "What did they tell you?" my father asked. Not "why did you go?" Not "what are you talking about?" Just "what did they tell you?" I sat down slowly. "There's an account in my name," I said, "one I don't control." My mother started crying immediately, soft, controlled, practiced tears, the kind that ask for forgiveness before accountability. "We were going to tell you," my father added. "When?" I asked. "At my wedding? When I apply for a mortgage? When debt collectors start calling?" "You don't understand," my mother said quickly. "We did this for the family." There it was, the sentence that justified everything. For the family. They explained in pieces, broken fragments of truth wrapped in excuses. A business deal that went wrong, loans they couldn't repay, pressure, fear, pride, and then my name. "You had clean credit," my father said. "No risks, no responsibilities yet." Yet, as if my life was a placeholder until they needed it. "We always planned to fix it," he added, "once things stabilized." Stable, the same word they used at Christmas dinner. I stood up. My hands were shaking now. "I told everyone I was doing well," I said. "I told them I had savings, plans, a future." "We were protecting you," my mother whispered. "No," I said. "You were protecting yourselves." Silence fell heavy between us. Not awkward, final. That night, I went to my room and locked the door like I was a teenager again, except this time I wasn't hiding from punishment. I was hiding from betrayal. I barely slept. My phone buzzed with messages from relatives, casual, cheerful follow-ups from Christmas, compliments, expectations, a future they thought was already secured. None of them knew they'd been fed a lie, and worse, none of them knew the lie was attached to me. The next morning, I went back to the bank. The same manager greeted me, but this time there was no small talk. "I need to know the damage," I said. He nodded and pulled up a report. Debt, liabilities, long-term risk. Not catastrophic, but not small either. Enough to ruin opportunities. Enough to keep me trapped if I did nothing. "There is something else," he said, lowering his voice. I looked up. "One of the loans tied to that account is nearing review," he continued. "If it fails, responsibility could shift." "To me?" I asked. He didn't need to answer. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just about the past anymore. This was about what could happen next. "Is there a way out?" I asked. He leaned back slightly. "That depends on how far you're willing to go." That sentence echoed in my head long after I left, because going far didn't just mean legal action. It meant choosing between my future and my parents' downfall. I went home again that evening, documents in hand. My parents were waiting like they knew I'd come armed with more than anger. "We need to talk," my father said. I placed the papers on the table. "No," I said quietly. "You need to listen." I told them everything the bank had said, the risks, the review, the possibility that this could land entirely on me. My mother broke down completely. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. "We'll fix it," he said again. "We promise." But this time, I didn't believe him, because promises were the currency that got me here. And as I looked at them, really looked at them, I realized something terrifying. They weren't scared of what they'd done. They were scared of getting caught. And the bank manager had one final option he hadn't explained yet, one that would force me to make a choice I wasn't ready for. The bank manager's words followed me everywhere. That depends on how far you're willing to go. I heard it in the silence of my room, in the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, in the careful way my parents avoided looking at me the next morning, as if eye contact alone might trigger consequences they could no longer control. I didn't confront them again right away, not because I'd forgiven them, but because I needed clarity. Anger blurs things, and I couldn't afford to be blurry anymore. So I started digging. Late at night, I went through old emails, old folders, paper files stuffed into drawers I hadn't opened in years. Anything with my name on it, anything financial, anything that could explain how deep this went. And the deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't a single bad decision. This was a system. They had been careful, strategic. They used moments when I was distracted, starting college, changing addresses, dealing with personal setbacks, times when mail could accidentally be redirected, when signatures could be helped, when questions could be answered on my behalf. I found letters from banks I'd never heard of, notices I'd never opened, statements that stopped abruptly right around the time I moved out for a year and then came back. That year suddenly made sense. The way my mother insisted on handling important paperwork, the way my father always asked casually if I'd checked my credit score, then laughed it off when I said no, the way they discouraged me from applying for certain things. "Not yet," they'd say. "Wait until you're more stable." They weren't protecting me from failure. They were protecting the lie. By the third night, my hands were shaking every time I opened a drawer, because with every document, the story of my childhood rearranged itself into something uglier. I wasn't the investment. I was the insurance. The next time I went to the bank, the manager closed the door to his office behind me. "There is a formal process," he said, choosing each word carefully, "to dispute authorization and reclaim control." "And?" I asked. "And it would trigger a review of everyone involved." My parents. "What happens to them?" I asked, even though I already knew. He didn't soften it. "Legal consequences, financial collapse, potential fraud charges depending on the findings." I nodded slowly. My chest felt tight again. "And if I don't?" I asked. He leaned forward. "Then the account remains tied to you. Any future defaults, reviews, or escalations could land on your shoulders." My shoulders. I thought of Christmas dinner again, the laughter, the pride, the way my parents had spoken about me like I was proof of something. They hadn't just lied to the family, they'd used me to silence their own shame. That night, I finally confronted my mother alone. She was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. When I sat across from her, she flinched like she expected me to yell. I didn't. "Did you ever think about asking me?" I asked quietly. Her eyes filled instantly. "We were afraid you'd say no." That answer hurt more than any excuse. "So you chose not to give me a choice," I said. She nodded. "We thought we were running out of time." "Running out of time for what?" I asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "For everything to fall apart." That's when I realized something important. They hadn't done this because they believed in me. They'd done it because they didn't believe in themselves, and they were willing to gamble my future to save their present. I didn't tell her about the bank's option yet. I needed to understand the full picture first. The next day, my aunt called. I almost didn't answer. "Your mother sounds stressed," she said gently. "Is everything okay?" There it was, the ripple, the lie starting to strain. "Everything's fine," I said automatically, the same words my parents used. But after we hung up, I felt sick, because now I was lying too, and I hated how easy it felt. I started imagining what would happen if the truth came out, not just legally, but socially. Family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, the way stories would be retold with me at the center, either as the victim or the destroyer. There was no version where I stayed untouched. Finally, I confronted my father again 2 nights later. I told him about the bank's process. He went very still. "You wouldn't," he said, not angry, certain. "Why?" I asked. "Because you're not that kind of person. You wouldn't ruin your own family." That sentence broke something in me, because it confirmed what I'd feared all along. He wasn't counting on my love. He was counting on my guilt. "You already ruined it," I said quietly. "I'm just deciding whether I live with it or you do." He stood up, pacing now. "We raised you," he said. "We sacrificed everything." "And I didn't?" I shot back. "You just didn't notice." The argument went in circles: sacrifice versus consent, fear versus responsibility, family versus future. No one won. That night, I barely slept again. I kept thinking about the bank manager's face when he'd said about how far you're willing to go, because far wasn't a distance, it was a line. And once crossed, there was no coming back. The next morning, something unexpected happened. I received an email from the bank. Subject line, "Urgent Account Review Update." My heart dropped before I even opened it. One of the loans tied to my name had triggered an early review, sooner than expected. Documents were requested, confirmations needed, signatures required. Mine. I had 48 hours. When I showed the email to my parents, my mother started crying again. My father looked at me with something new in his eyes. Fear. Real fear. "We need you," he said. "Just this once. Sign what they ask. After that, we'll fix everything." I looked at the email again, at the deadline, at my name. This was the moment. Not someday, not hypothetically, now. If I signed, I became complicit. If I refused, everything would unravel. And suddenly Christmas dinner felt like a warning I should have heard sooner, because the bank manager told me one more thing I hadn't shared yet, something that would change the consequences of my next move completely. The bank manager's final warning replayed in my head like a quiet alarm I couldn't shut off. "If you sign," he had said earlier that day on the phone, his voice lower than usual, "you won't just be protecting them, you'll be confirming awareness. After that, the account and everything tied to it becomes unquestionably yours." Unquestionably. That word carried weight, finality. No room for confusion or innocence. I stared at the email again. 48 hours, documents attached, neutral language, polite urgency, no emotion, just consequences. My parents sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where homework was once checked, where birthdays were planned, where I learned how to trust. My mother's hands trembled around her teacup. My father leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on me like this was a negotiation he still believed he could win. "We're asking you as your parents," he said, "not as bankers, not as lawyers." That distinction told me everything. "You're asking me to lie," I said. No, my mother whispered. We're asking you to help us. Help. The same word they'd used for years, the same word that blurred lines until they disappeared completely. Did you ever plan to tell me? I asked. They exchanged a glance, a long one. We hoped, my father said slowly, that by the time you found out, it would already be fixed. Fixed how? I wanted to ask. Fixed by time? By silence? By letting me build a future on ground that wasn't stable? I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the street looked normal. Neighbors living their lives. No one could see the choice sitting on my shoulders. I thought about my credit score, my future applications, jobs, homes, freedom. Then I thought about Christmas dinner again, about how easily they'd spoken for me, how comfortable they'd been rewriting my reality. That comfort scared me more than the debt. I need time, I said. You don't have time, my father replied too quickly. That was the problem. They'd already spent mine. I left the house with the documents still unopened. I needed air, space, somewhere my thoughts wouldn't echo off the walls of family obligation. I drove until I ended up at a small cafe I used to study in years ago. It smelled like burnt coffee and old books, safe, familiar. I ordered a drink I didn't even want and opened my laptop. That's when I did something I hadn't done before. I checked my credit report. The screen loaded slowly, like it knew what it was about to reveal. Accounts, inquiries, lines of credit I'd never applied for. Nothing screamed disaster, but everything whispered control. I realized then that my parents hadn't just used my name, they'd shaped my options. My phone buzzed, a message from my cousin. Hey, Dad was saying how proud your parents are. You're really killing it, apparently. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Apparently. I typed back a neutral response and closed my laptop. My appetite was gone, replaced by a dull ache that sat just below my ribs. I wasn't just deciding my future. I was deciding what truth would exist in this family. That night, I didn't go home again. I stayed with a friend who noticed something was wrong but didn't push. We watched mindless TV. She fell asleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations from years ago with new understanding. Every time my parents insisted on handling things, every time they discouraged independence masked as care, every time they said, "Trust us," trust had been the tool. By morning, I'd made one decision. I went back to the bank. The manager greeted me with the same calm professionalism, but when he saw my face, he knew this wasn't just paperwork anymore. I haven't signed anything, I said. He nodded. Good. That single word surprised me. There's something you should know, he continued, pulling up the account again. If this review proceeds without your confirmation, the bank will require direct verification of original authorization. What does that mean? I asked. It means your parents will have to prove you knowingly agreed, he said, in person with evidence. I swallowed. And if they can't? He didn't hesitate. Then the narrative collapses. Narrative. That's what this had always been, a story carefully constructed and protected until I showed up asking questions. There's more, he added, because the account involves multiple institutions, once one flags it, others may follow. A domino effect. I pictured family gatherings unraveling in real time, phone calls, whispers, accusations, the lie cracking under pressure. Is there a way to protect myself without destroying them? I asked quietly. He leaned back. You can't control outcomes, he said, only boundaries. Boundaries. I thanked him and left, my heart heavier but my mind clearer. When I got home that evening, my parents were waiting, again. But something had changed. They weren't pleading this time. They were strategic. "We spoke to a lawyer," my father said immediately. My stomach dropped. "He says this could get messy, public, painful." That word public was a threat dressed in concern. "We don't want you hurt," she continued. I almost laughed. "You already hurt me," I said. "You're just afraid I'll let others see it." My father's voice hardened. "If this goes forward," he said, "it won't just affect us." "I know," I replied. "It'll affect everyone who believed your story." Silence. Then my mother said something I wasn't prepared for. "Do you know what people will think of you, turning on your own parents?" There it was. Not love, not regret, reputation. That was the line. I stood up slowly. "I didn't turn on you," I said. "You put me in front of this." I walked away before they could say anything else, before guilt could creep back in and do its work. That night, I opened the email again. 48 hours were now 36. I hovered over the attachments, over my name, over the future they wanted me to sign away. And then my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't family. It was the bank manager. A short message. "We've identified another account connected to your name. This one predates the first." My breath caught. Predates? How far back did this go? How long had I been living inside a lie that started before I even knew how money worked? I sank onto the bed, phone shaking in my hand, because if there was another account, then this wasn't damage control anymore. This was excavation, and I wasn't ready for what I was about to uncover next. I didn't reply to the bank manager right away. I just sat there, staring at the message, letting the word predates echo until it stopped sounding like language and started sounding like a verdict. Predates the first account meant before I was 18, before I was legally responsible, before I could even understand what consent meant in financial terms. My parents hadn't just crossed a line, they'd erased it. I called the bank manager back instead of texting. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "How old?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. Not technical, human. "It appears the account was opened when you were 16, he said. 16. I laughed, one sharp, humorless sound, then immediately felt sick. "That's not possible," I said. "I was a minor." "Yes," he replied gently, "which is why this changes the situation significantly." I closed my eyes. At 16, I was worried about exams, friends, whether my life would ever make sense. I trusted my parents completely, signed whatever they put in front of me without reading because why would I read something my parents gave me? Now I understood why they'd always told me, "You don't need to worry about this stuff yet." They weren't delaying responsibility, they were hiding evidence. "Can I see it?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "but I need to be clear, this account was structured very differently. It's more serious." More serious than fraud using my adult identity? I drove to the bank in silence, every red light stretching longer than it should have. My hands were numb on the steering wheel. My body felt like it was bracing for something my mind refused to picture yet. The manager had already prepared the file. "This account," he said, sliding the folder toward me, "was used as a guarantor profile." Guarantor? I swallowed. For what? He didn't answer immediately. He turned the screen toward me instead. Business loans? Personal loans? Third-party liabilities? Not just my parents. Other people. My parents hadn't only used my name, they'd rented it out. I stared at the screen, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. "These obligations," he continued, "are partially resolved. Some are not." How many people? I asked. More than one, he said carefully. That was when something inside me finally snapped, not into anger, but clarity. This wasn't about Christmas dinner anymore. That dinner wasn't the betrayal. It was the slip, the moment they got too comfortable lying because they believed the story was unbreakable. I was a child, I said quietly. Yes, he agreed, which is why the bank takes this very seriously. I left with copies again, thicker this time, heavier, not just paper, weight. When I got home, my parents were arguing in the living room. They stopped when they saw me. I didn't sit down. I know about the other account, I said. My mother grayed pale. My father's face changed, not guilt, not fear, but calculation. Who told you? He asked. That question ended any remaining doubt I had. You opened an account in my name when I was 16. You used it to guarantee loans for other people. My mother collapsed onto the couch, sobbing openly now. My father rubbed his temples. We didn't have a choice, he said. You always had a choice. You just chose yourselves. It was temporary. We were helping friends, family. Family. The word had become meaningless. You risked my entire future before I even had one. He looked up at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw something like regret, but it was drowned out by something else. Fear of consequences, not fear of losing me. You can't let this go forward, he said. If authorities get involved, you should have thought about that when I was 16, I cut in. Silence fell hard. Then my mother whispered, We loved you. I believed her, and that made it worse, because love without boundaries is still harm. I went to my room and locked the door. Again, some habits come back when the truth is too heavy. My phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from my parents, from relatives. Word was spreading, not details, but tension, the kind families feel before something explodes. I ignored all of it and opened my laptop. I searched for legal advice, for stories like mine, for reassurance that I wasn't insane for feeling betrayed by the people who raised me. And I found them. Stories of children used as financial shields, as clean names, as collateral. Stories that ended in courtrooms, estrangement, relief mixed with grief. There was no clean ending, only honest ones. The bank manager emailed again later that night. Given the minor status at the time, you have strong grounds to fully separate yourself. However, once initiated, this process cannot be stopped. Cannot be stopped. That sentence landed differently now. This wasn't about deciding if something happened. It was about deciding who it happened to. I thought about my younger self, 16, trusting, signing papers without question, believing family meant safety. No one had protected her, so I would. The next morning, I told my parents my decision. I'm not signing anything, I said calmly, and I'm initiating separation. My mother screamed. My father shouted. Words flew, selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. I listened quietly, because for the first time, their words no longer defined me. You'll destroy us, my father said finally. I met his eyes. You built this on me, I replied. I'm just stepping out of the way. I left the house with a small bag, not because I was running, but because I was done negotiating my own worth. Outside, the air felt different, sharper, cleaner. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my aunt. What's going on? Your parents are saying you're doing something terrible. I stared at the message, and that's when I realized the final lie was about to be told. Not in a bank, not at Christmas dinner, but to everyone. And if I stayed silent now, I would become part of it. I stared at my aunt's message for a long time. Your parents are saying you're doing something terrible. Of course they were. They had always been good at shaping stories before anyone else could ask questions. This was just the biggest version yet. I didn't reply immediately, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something important. Silence was no longer neutral. Silence was consent. I put my phone down and sat on the edge of the bed in the small guest room I'd temporarily moved into. The walls were bare, no family photos, no history. It felt strange, but also lighter, like stepping into a space that didn't already have expectations carved into it. I thought about the bank manager's words again. Once initiated, this process cannot be stopped. That applied to more than paperwork. Once the truth started moving, it wouldn't stop at bank doors. It would travel through phone calls, group chats, whispered conversations after dinner, through people who loved my parents and wouldn't want to believe me, people who would ask why I didn't just handle it privately, as if privacy hadn't been used against me my entire life. I opened my phone and began typing a response to my aunt, deleted it, typed again, deleted that too. Finally, I sent one sentence. I found out my identity was used for years without my consent. I'm protecting myself. Nothing dramatic, no accusations, just facts. Her reply came quickly. Your parents say you knew. I felt my chest tighten, not in surprise, but in grief. That was the counter-narrative. I was expecting it. You knew, you agreed, you're exaggerating. The classic moves. I replied again. I was 16. This time, there was a pause. Minutes passed, then another message appeared. Can we talk? That was when I realized the story was already cracking, not because I was loud, but because I was precise. Over the next 2 days, conversations multiplied. An uncle asking vague questions, a cousin checking in just to see how I was doing, my grandmother calling and saying nothing about money, only that I sounded tired. I answered carefully, truthfully, without drama. Every conversation felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong word and I'd become the villain they were preparing. But something unexpected happened. People started connecting dots. Oh, one cousin said quietly on the phone, that explains why they always spoke for you. Another admitted, your dad asked me once if I'd be willing to co-sign something. I thought it was strange. The image of my parents as purely responsible, self-sacrificing figures began to wobble. Meanwhile, the bank process moved forward. I officially filed to dispute authorization on both accounts. The moment I clicked submit, my hands shook, but not with doubt, with relief. Because for the first time, the truth was written somewhere that wasn't my diary or my chest. The bank manager called me that evening. This will escalate quickly now, he warned. You should be prepared. For what? I asked. Requests for statements, possibly interviews, and he hesitated. Pushback. Pushback came faster than I expected. My father showed up unannounced at the guest house. I didn't open the door at first. I watched through the window as he stood there, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. He looked smaller than I remembered, older. He asked to talk. I opened the door. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how I was. Instead, he said, "Do you have any idea what you've started?" "Yes," I replied calmly. His voice rose. "People are calling, asking questions." I nodded. That's what happens when secrets stop being secrets. "You're making us look like criminals," he snapped. I met his eyes. "You used my identity as a minor. What would you call that?" For a moment, I thought he might yell. Instead, his voice dropped low. Dangerous. Families handle things internally. I felt something cold settle in me. "You didn't handle it internally," I said. "You handled it through me." He stepped closer. "If this goes further," he said, "there will be consequences you don't understand." That was the moment I knew, not because of the threat, but because of what was missing. He wasn't worried about losing me. He was worried about losing control. "You should leave," I said quietly. He stared at me, searching for the daughter who used to bend. She wasn't there. He left without another word. That night, I cried not because I regretted my decision, but because I finally allowed myself to mourn the parents I thought I had. The next morning, my phone exploded. Messages, missed calls, notifications. The bank had contacted my parents directly. The review had officially expanded. One of the third-party loans tied to my name had defaulted, and because of my dispute, responsibility was being reassigned. My mother called me hysterical. "They're saying we might lose the house. How can you do this to us?" I closed my eyes. "You did this," I said softly. She hung up. The guilt tried to creep in after that, quietly, persistently. What if they lose everything? What if the family will never forgive you? What if you're alone after this? Then I remembered something the bank manager said during our very first meeting. Healthy systems don't rely on one person never asking questions. My parents' entire stability was built on my silence. That wasn't love. That was exploitation dressed as loyalty. A week later, I was called in for a formal statement. Sitting in that neutral room, answering questions about signatures, dates, and consent, I felt strangely calm. This wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping. When I left, the bank manager stopped me. "There's something else," he said. "Because of the minor involvement, this may no longer be just a financial matter." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "It may be referred externally," he said carefully. Externally. Legal authorities. My stomach flipped, but I didn't back away. "What happens then?" I asked. He met my eyes. "Then the truth becomes public in a way no one can control." I walked out into the sunlight, heart pounding. My parents had spent years shaping a perfect image. Now it was slipping through their fingers, and I was about to find out how far they would go to stop it. Because that night, I received a message that changed the tone of everything. Not from family, not from the bank, from a number I didn't recognize. It read, "You need to withdraw your dispute. This is your final warning." The message sat on my screen like a threat that didn't need to explain itself. "You need to withdraw your dispute. This is your final warning." No name, no context, just certainty. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. Because this wasn't emotional manipulation anymore. This wasn't guilt or family pressure or reputation games. This was fear. I took a screenshot immediately and forwarded it to the bank manager, then to a legal advice line I'd been given earlier but hoped I'd never need. Only then did I notice my hands were shaking. I tried to tell myself it was just intimidation, empty words meant to scare me back into silence. But something about it felt different, too direct, too confident. My parents had always used emotional control. This felt external, calculated. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside the guest house made my chest tighten. Every car slowing down felt suspicious. I hated that feeling, hated that after everything, fear was still trying to make decisions for me. In the morning, the bank manager called. "You did the right thing sending that," he said. "This escalates things." "How?" I asked. "It suggests third-party involvement," he replied, "which aligns with what we're seeing." My stomach dropped. "What we're seeing? How?" He paused. "Some of the loans guaranteed under your name involve individuals who don't typically operate cleanly." That word again, cleanly. "You think this message is connected to them?" I asked. "It's possible," he said, "especially now that your dispute threatens to expose the entire structure." I felt cold all over. This wasn't just about my parents covering debts anymore. This was about protecting a network.
I was told not to respond to the message, not to engage. Everything would be documented, traced. And suddenly, my parents' panic made terrifying sense. They weren't just facing embarrassment, they were facing exposure. That afternoon, my father called again. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice was calm, too calm. "We need to end this, now." "I didn't say you sent it, I swear," he added quickly before I could speak. "I didn't say you did," I replied. Silence. Then, "You don't understand who you're dealing with," he said quietly. There it was, the admission he didn't realize he was making. You knew this could happen." He exhaled shakily. "We thought we could manage it." Manage it? With my name? With my future? With my childhood, I said. "That's what you used." His voice cracked for the first time. "If this continues, people will go to prison." I closed my eyes. Not we, people. "Then they should have thought about that before involving a 16-year-old, I said. "You'll be dragged into it too," he warned. I already was. I just didn't know. He didn't have an answer to that. That evening, everything exploded at once. The bank confirmed the referral had moved forward. One of the third-party lenders was being formally investigated. My parents' assets were frozen pending review. And then, inevitably, the family found out. Not rumors this time, facts. My grandmother called me, voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "I didn't know how," I said honestly. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I didn't expect. "They always controlled too much. I just never thought they'd use you." That sentence did something to me because it meant I wasn't crazy. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't alone. The final confrontation came 2 days later. My parents asked to meet in a neutral place, a small office recommended by their lawyer. I agreed. They looked different, worn, stripped of authority. No shouting this time, no tactics, just desperation. My mother cried openly. My father stared at the table. "We never meant for this to happen," she said. "We thought we were buying time." "Time for what?" I asked. She couldn't answer. Their lawyer spoke carefully, outlining possible outcomes: reduced penalties, settlements, cooperation. Then he turned to me. "Your cooperation will be noted if you're willing to frame this as a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? 16 years old? Forged consent? Threatening messages? I looked at my parents. They didn't ask me to do it. They expected me to. That was the moment I felt something shift permanently. "No," I said. The word landed hard. My mother gasped. My father finally looked up at me. "You're choosing this?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm choosing myself." The room went very still. I stood up. "I didn't destroy this family," I said calmly. "I stopped letting it destroy me." And I walked out. The investigation moved fast after that. Statements, evidence, timelines. The message I'd received was traced, not to my parents, but to someone connected to the loans. That confirmation changed everything. Charges were filed, names were printed, and suddenly the story wasn't about a difficult child. It was about a system that collapsed the moment its weakest link refused to stay silent. The night the news broke locally, my phone stayed quiet. No threats, no accusations, just stillness. And in that stillness, I finally felt something I hadn't in years: safe. But safety came with grief, because while the truth had won, the family I thought I had was gone. And all that remained was the final question: what do you do after surviving your own parents?
When everything finally went quiet, I didn't know what to do with the silence. For years, my life had been shaped by tension I couldn't name, expectations I didn't agree to, fear disguised as love. And suddenly, it was gone, ripped out so completely that all I could hear was my own breathing. Surviving your parents doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing in the ruins of a house you once called home, holding pieces you can't put back together, wondering which memories were real and which were built to keep you obedient. The investigations continued without me at the center anymore. That part was important. For the first time, my name wasn't being used for something, it was being protected. I changed my phone number, updated my address, took control of every account tied to me. Each small action felt like reclaiming territory I didn't know I'd lost. The bank manager called one last time to confirm the separation was complete. "It's done," he said. "Your record is clean." Clean. I sat on the edge of my bed and cried, not because I was sad, but because I could finally exhale. Clean meant choices. Clean meant freedom. Clean meant my future would finally belong to me. Family gatherings stopped including my parents and me in the same room. Some relatives chose sides. Others chose distance. A few surprised me with quiet support. My grandmother wrote me a letter. Not a text, not a call, a letter. She said, "You did what none of us were brave enough to do. That doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest." I read that sentence over and over until it settled into my bones. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. It was the grief. Grieving parents who were still alive. Grieving a childhood that looked safe from the outside. Grieving the version of myself who believed loyalty meant silence. There were days I missed them, not who they were, but who I needed them to be. And that's something no one prepares you for. Healing doesn't come with closure scenes or apologies that fix everything. Sometimes it comes with unanswered questions and the strength to stop asking them. Months later, Christmas came again. No long table, no performance smiles, no lies wrapped in warmth. I spent it with friends who knew the truth and didn't need me to be impressive to deserve a seat. We ate badly cooked food, laughed too loud, talked about nothing important. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was playing a role. I felt present. People still ask me if I regret it, if I wish I'd handled it differently, if I'd stayed quiet a little longer. Here's the truth they don't always want to hear. Silence would have destroyed me more slowly, but more completely. I didn't ruin my parents' lives. I refused to sacrifice mine to save theirs. And that distinction matters. Because this story isn't really about money. It's about boundaries. It's about how often children are taught that love means endurance, obedience, self-erasure. It's about how easily family loyalty is used as a weapon against the most trusting person in the room. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, if you've ever felt responsible for problems you didn't create, hear this clearly. You are not disloyal for protecting yourself. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not cruel for refusing to carry someone else's secrets. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop being useful to people who benefit from your silence. I don't know what my parents tell themselves now. I don't know if they regret it or if they still believe they were justified. But I know this. I wake up without fear. I make plans without guilt. I trust my instincts again. And that is worth everything I lost. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, remember this. The truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. The truth just refuses to clean up the mess afterward. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And if you're still finding the courage to choose yourself, I hope this helps you feel less alone.